Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Val Melvis and here we talk writing content, specifically for fantasy writers. Today I wanted us to take a look at organizing plot lines and how we can go about this. The more the merrier, right? Well, kind of. Your readers will definitely enjoy having several storylines to follow, but what's really important is that you do it in a way that is easy to follow and understandable for the reader. Do you want to know how not to overwhelm them? Let's find out. First, we're going to have to differentiate between two different things, the plot lines and the plot points. The plot line is essentially the story or a story within your story. The plot line goes from point A to point B, so from start to finish. From whatever happens on this line is what takes the story from there to there. I think that makes sense so far, right? And on that plot line, you'll have different characters entering, different events happening, different settings, but it essentially is the start and ending of a story. Now, on the other hand, plot points are certain events, twists, or turns that go onto that plot line, essentially. So, the best way I would go about this is having the plot points organized through scene cards. Scene cards are a very popular way for writers to organize scenes that they want to get out of their head and kind of onto paper. Sometimes we have a really great idea or we know we want to include a certain scene in our novel, but we're not quite sure where it fits in yet. So instead of losing it, we'll write it on a scene card. A scene card video is something I might make later just to explain how you can go about making scene cards, but it's important that you just kind of write it down and keep it aside. Now, the great thing about those scene cards or those plot points is that you can move them around. Remember, plot points should be coherent, so they should feed into the overall plot line and how it goes from A to B. You can also think about it as a kind of gradient. Think about it, you're starting, for example, with red and ending with blue in the plot line. So, if you're in the red, so the plot point should be going from red to kind of purplish to blue. But you cannot have a fully blue plot point in the kind of red area still of the plot line. That's going to confuse the reader and it doesn't really make sense because as your story unfolds, we get to meet new characters, we learn new things about them or the mystery or whatever is going on in your story. So just learning the difference between these two things is super important because you want to be able to move your things around. Rarely does your first draft ever become the finished book. And I mean this in the nicest way. Our first drafts are for ourselves usually. They don't really benefit the reader. Like when I'm currently finishing my first draft of my debut novel. And I'm super excited about that, guys. So stay tuned for that. But it's just really, really important that you kind of know also these plot points and you'll be able to separate them like later down the line. Like you don't want anything to be like, of course, have them kind of help each other by being kind of like interlinked, but don't have them super tightly linked, because if you remove a certain scene or your editor says, hey, this scene is kind of irrelevant or it's not appropriate or it's whatever, you want to be able to still follow the plot line seamlessly. So that's really important. So with so many ideas swirling around in your head, it can kind of get hard to always keep the main plot line in your eyesight and to keep focused. But you have to completely focus because this is what you'll want to share with your readers. Find a main plot line and pursue it, so your readers will also have a clear way that they can read your story without getting confused. A lot of times I pick up a good book, but it turns out to have a really complicated either setup or plot line to follow, and I kind of put it aside because at the end of the day, reading should positively engage your brain, but it shouldn't give you the same effect as kind of having to do a super hard math homework. So you have to be able to balance these two. Remembering what your main plot idea, your plot line is the most important part, because another common syndrome that I find in first-time fiction writers is the overindulgence of themes. So you want to have so many different things going on at the same time. We'll talk about that also in a different video. But once again, focus on your main plot. Write it down. Write it in 2 to 3 sentences, not more, okay? What is your plot about? So for me, a deaf apothecary finds an amnesic inventor in a hidden sanctuary. The only problem, he had no way to get there. You can build a lot based from this sentence, and so what's really important is that you'll include the main character or characters in this case included, the kind of setting, and what is the initial kickoff point. to your story. That is going to be your main plot line that they'll want to have to follow. And it doesn't always have to be some grand epic fantasy high stake thing. It can be, I want to open a bookshop or a coffee shop, but there needs to be a clear goal that your readers can follow. So, but what if I want to have several plot lines or point of views? That's great, and we'll get to that in a second. But for point of views, I think it's really great to have 2 to 3 point of views per book. I wouldn't go for more than that, which I know is common in the fantasy genre, but I personally find it too much overwhelming information at the beginning. But having 2 or 3 point of views helps you kind of tell your story without having a super biased narrator, because if you see the events of a story unfold from different point of views, it gives you kind of a better overall knowledge of the situation as the reader. So I definitely recommend it. And it can be really fun to explore different areas that maybe your main character wouldn't get access to, but the side character with a point of view or the villain does. That's kind of the case in my story. I went with a 3 POV, so multiple point of views. And it's going to be the main heroine, the hero, which I still think he's more of a secondary character, but he gets quite a few point of views as well, and the villain. Because obviously the hero wouldn't really know into the villain's mind and her plans and all these things. So this was like really important, and kind of your readers will kind of get this like overarching perspective of how things unfold, and they can kind of think like, oh, is this gonna happen? Is this gonna happen? Oh, I know what's going on there. And it kind of gives them also a feeling of satisfaction. Now, having several plot lines is great. And in writing, we tend to refer to it as the main plot line and the subplots you might have. Common subplots in fiction are mystery and romance. You can kind of throw them into any other genre and they will more or less make sense. Recently, I've been really into rom-com Regency mysteries, which is something I didn't think I'd like, but I kind of do. It works really well. I've also seen a rise of romance in fantasy or mystery in fantasy, and I think it's getting really interesting because you can combine so many interesting elements. So I'll just walk you guys through 3 do's and 3 don'ts of adding subplots to your novel. For the do's, they should first of all enhance the main plot. They should definitely give more credence to it and kind of highlight how important it is. It should also help promote character growth, because maybe in the main plotline there's simply no space for it, but in those subplots you can have a lot of character arcs going on, which is really great. And like I already mentioned, it can add a sub-genre to your own genre. So like having the mystery in the Regency novels, or having the romance in the fantasy novels. It can kind of open your novel to more readers that would be interested in it. Because I was just really interested in reading more mysteries, and that's in reading more Regencies, and that's how I kind of stumbled into like the Regency mystery genre, and I really liked it. So it definitely helps setting up at the beginning. Okay, and for the don'ts, this is super important. It should definitely not distract from the main plot line. It is okay to have a certain kind of priority listing when it comes to your plots. If you want to write a really epic fantasy, serial with 10 books, and you want to, take the plot over into the next book, that's perfectly fine. But once again, first of all, don't lose sight of what your main plot is, and then you can also rank in terms of priority. Have them be priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, whatever you want, but know it for yourself when you're writing, because trust me, you lose yourself in the words as you go along. So having it just kind of on paper before you even start is super important. It also shouldn't add just filler words or help you meet the word count that you want. I think when authors add subplots only for adding word count or for appealing to a certain demographic audience, I really dislike that, because you can see that the plot is most often, I wouldn't call it poorly written, but weakly written. I think that's more the right word for it, because when you feel that an author really cares about a subject, you'll find that in their words. But when it's not the case, you'll also find that in the words. You'll find the lack of it instead. Maybe that's just an observation I made, so I'm also not trying to call out anyone for this, because I kind of fell into it myself of, I would like to include this and this and this, but I'm like, that isn't relevant. First of all, to what the theme of my novel is, what I'm trying to share, of even what's important to me. And when I read that writing, it felt very sort of robotic, and I didn't like it. So I think it's better to just kind of stay away from that. And lastly, you should not leave any unfinished or unanswered questions or subplots in your story. The exception I would make for this is if this is kind of a lead up into becoming the main plot line in the following sequel, or maybe in a prequel or something like this. That's fine if that's the case. But in all other things, it really, really bothers and annoys readers. If you like pinch their interest, you have to reward that. Otherwise, like if there's no payoff, people will remember that actually about your book and then be like, even if I love the main plot line, but the subplots just disappointed me that I didn't get like the necessary conclusion, they might just not buy the next couple books, and that would be really sad. So definitely, if you want to use that subplot from the first book and kind of maybe give it a kind of satisfactory conclusion for this book, but then take it as the main plot line and use that to connect into the following book, great job, amazing. And I know so many beautiful authors do that, so try to follow that. So my main advice would be to really graph out your plot points, remember what we learned earlier, before you even start writing. I understand that a lot of people are more pantsers rather than plotters, and that's okay. For me, myself, I like to give kind of a very detailed plot outline before I even get into writing. So I'll have like my 1-2 pages essentially just filled with what I want to happen in the story, and that's just like me brainstorming and getting it out. But then I have kind of more of a chapter breakdown, and this chapter breakdown should have 2 versions: the before first draft and the after first draft version, at least for me, because the before first draft version is what I'm planning to show in that chapter, like what I'm planning to write. But the after first draft is what I actually wrote, because I also discover new ideas, or get different things kind of as I'm writing, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna add this, or I'm gonna remove this, or I'm gonna move this into a different chapter. It makes way more sense. So again, having your plot points on paper or on scene cards really helps you move them around and feeds into an overall better plot line that your readers can enjoy. So yeah, it was a bit of a short one today, guys, but I hope it helped you with organizing your plot lines. And I started a writing account that is purely for writing advice. I also have a separate one for my whips that I'll talk about next time, but this one, please guys, give it like a follow. It would really, really help. And yeah, please subscribe. Thank you guys. I love you. Bye.